Good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's Talk Photography webinar on the miniature worlds of David Gilliver. Hi, David. How are you, my friend?
I'm well, thanks, Jay. How are you doing?
I'm very good, mate. We know that because we say it every time, but we've been chatting behind the scenes, which is good. But no, I'm very good, mate, and I'm glad to hear you are as well. And it's great to have you back. It seems like, I know it wasn't long ago, but it seems like we have had a bit of a gap from each other. So
I know.
So it was like you were my new best friend for a while, and then he's abandoned me again. No, it's great to have you back, mate. And as you know,
have you been cheating on me, Jay?
Do you know what? I don't know if I have. I told you I've had a bit of a gap. We've had a little bit of a break because we just had a little bit of time off from the webinars. But I'm not going to say we haven't got some guest photographers, but I definitely don't have any toy photographers or light painting.
Oh, there we go.
At the moment, I can't promise I won't give you some competition in the future, mate, to be honest on that. Academy members who know me will also know that I have an interest in, a geeky interest in the toys. So I was really looking forward to tonight as well. And obviously, when we started looking at, when I was introduced to you when you were introduced to me by Laura, my associate, and I saw what you were doing, I just thought, I can't wait to be chatting to this guy. And yet, we hit it off like that. So brilliant. So I'm really interested in. I started having an insight into what your mechanics of it from just seeing like so you behind the scenes on Facebook. So tonight's going to be real interesting for all of us, I think. So I'm really looking forward to it. But David, before we get into all of this incredible macro photography, tell us. I know this is like your third time for it now, but for those people who might not have been on your previous webinars, tell us just a little bit about you and how you've become the full-time fine art photographer that you are today.
Sure. Yep. Thanks for having me back again. So I studied at the Glasgow School of Art around 20 years ago. And during my time at art school, before all the light painting stuff happened, I actually specialised in macro and toy photography in the very early days. During I think it was my second year of art school, when I was lacking real direction in terms of subject matter and style, I happened upon the work of a photographer and artist, an American artist called David Leventhal, who specializes in figurine photography, and were immediately hooked and fascinated by this kind of representing the world or emotions, if you like, through dioramas and through creating miniature scenes. And that's how the journey into macro began for me when I was around 18, 19 years of age. And the light painting photography, that all started around 12 years ago, sometime after art school. And I seem to have rather bizarrely become a specialist in two completely different areas. One being macro photography, which we'll talk about this evening, and the other being night photography and long exposure photography and the art of light painting. So this gives the other side of my brain a chance to speak to you all this evening, and kind of hope that you all find it interesting. It's going to be visually entertaining, I think.
Brilliant, brilliant. And of course, if anybody hasn't seen them or wasn't part of the Academy, then David's previous two webinars on light painting available on the Academy to be watched. And this obviously will be on the Academy within a few days as well for a rewatch on that. David, I won't waste any time. We'll give you the screen. So let me make you the presenter. So I've just done that. So it should be prompting you to share your screen.
Yeah.
I'll stay on.
Let me know when you can see it.
Will do. And just as we're waiting for the screens to swap, guys, just to, yeah, I can see it, mate. So if you,
okay.
So guys, any questions or queries, any questions you have for David, please put them through the question panel. As I said, we'll break between the folders and have a quick chat if there are any, and of course we'll cover all your questions otherwise at the end. David, it's all yours, mate.
Thank you very much for the warm introduction once again. Okay. So yeah, as you all know, my name's David, and I specialise in both macro and light painting. Tonight's going to be all about macro photography and creating and capturing miniature worlds, something that I've become relatively well known for doing over the years. I've been at this for some 20 or so years, and I think the little people have travelled more extensively than I have, certainly over the last year, that's for sure. So it's going to be really enjoyable taking you through some of this work, and I guess speaking to you a little bit about the how-to process behind the work as well. So as I mentioned, let's rewind maybe 20 or so years ago. I was a young man at art school, lacking real direction in terms of what my genuine interests were as a photographer and artist. And it was during my second year at art school that I witnessed an incident taking place, which I'm going to show you in just a short second, that thereafter led to my fascination in the world of miniatures and dioramas. And we'll just skip onto that image now, because it's quite a grim start, this, but it does have a happy ending. I can tell you that right now, without any delay. I should point out that the victim, the person in the car, the white car that you can see there, was incredibly recovered completely unharmed from this rather worrying-looking accident. So, going back 20 years ago, I was up in the 3rd or 4th floor, I think it was, of a dentist's waiting room. And in the street below me, I heard a massive bang, a massive crash, and ran over, looked out the window, and saw this rather worrying-looking incident unfolding beneath where I was waiting. And because I was quite high up, I had a relatively unique vantage point of what was going on. They cordoned the whole area off. And of course, the police and emergency services were called into action as they tried to cut the person out of the car. That massive trailer had offloaded. I think the pin had snapped on the lorry, and it had incredibly, timing-wise, landed on a passing car in the adjacent lane. And as I watched this unfolding, I'd always been kind of trained as a young photographer to have my camera with me, which I did have. Thus, the photograph you're looking at right now. And I felt very guilty and uncomfortable photographing what was going on. And this was back in the day of course, film cameras and film photography. And had I learned, I think, after this incident had taken place, that anyone had been severely injured or worse than that, I don't think I would have even have developed the negatives. But within moments of this situation being resolved, it was in the local press that evening that the person was fine, and so I did get the film developed, and then felt strangely compelled thereafter. I think it was partly because I was watching this incident take place, as I say, from afar and from a high vantage point, and it felt very much like watching the figures in miniature rushing around as they kind of worked hard to save a life at the time. Beneath me, it reminded me of playing with my little figurines as a child. And like I say, because I want a grim outcome to the scenario, I felt strangely compelled to kind of reenact the scene in miniature after a discussion with one of my art tutors at the time. And that's what I did. So you'll have to excuse the crudeness of the next couple of shots, because they're not overly well constructed, as you can see. They're very basic. Thankfully, my work's come on a little bit since the early years. But you can see in a very basic way, I recreated the scene as a miniature diorama, which led to some incredibly fascinating discussion at the time at art school between my professors and my fellow students and pupils as we discussed this whole process of reenacting what was quite a serious scene as an adult using toys, essentially. And so I made several images of the scene in miniature, and when it came to finally putting them on the wall for the discussion, as I say, with my teachers and so on, I presented the images alongside the original crash scene and then the miniature creations.
David, just to make you aware, sorry to interrupt, just to make you aware that the pictures seem to be behind your voice. We seem to have a slight delay. Obviously, there's nothing I can do about it. So
okay.
Just to make the audiences aware that we know you're changing them, but you sometime when it seems to be about a 30-second delay between your changes at the moment, but we can't unfortunately speed it up. So
no problem.
Right,
so there's a 30-second. Is that a delay, Jay? So you're seeing them 30 seconds.
So we're hearing you, but the images are definitely behind. With them changing. But we're seeing at the moment, like the overhead shot at the moment, we're seeing of the scene, and now we've got a person sat with a tape measure above it, if that helps.
Yeah. Thank you. No, I'll try and bear that in mind. I'll try and preempt that and finish speaking about the previous image as I'm on the next one, if you know what I mean.
Thanks, mate. Cheers, bud.
Thank you for letting me know. Okay, so after the discussion kind of entailed from my critique at the time with my tutors and students about that whole approach, I became pretty intent that I was, personally kind of onto something thematically. I wanted to pursue the idea further, and that's what I did. And my teacher at the time, Professor Von Judge, pretty cool name, he mentioned the work of David Leventhal, who I mentioned earlier, and I went and rented out a couple of his books from the library, and lo and behold, fell in love with the world of miniature, if you like, and this notion of creating scenes, whether they be of a serious or playful nature, using miniatures to convey concepts and feelings. And that's how my work evolved over time and continues to evolve over time. It's something I've been doing for over 20 years now, pretty regularly. And we'll finish off a bit later on by looking at some coronavirus-linked themed work that I've been working on as well to try and keep things relevant and up to date. So the figures you can see on your screen right now, they come in various different sizes. I buy my figurines online, normally eBay or Amazon. They're incredibly small, no bigger than the size of your fingernail kind of thing. And I usually use something called HO scale figurines. And the tiny one that you can see there is called N scale, which is even smaller. But the HO scale ones, which are just a little bit larger, they lend themselves very well to the work that I make. Now, Jay, can you just mention to me when the slide moves on to the kind of cloudy sky backdrop image that I have on my screen?
It already has, mate. Just as you were talking about the different size one, just as you were finishing it, it moved, yeah. Ideal.
That gives me a rough kind of guesstimate of how to do this now. That's perfect. So yeah, those are the scales of figurines that I use. As Jay mentioned, I wrote a very detailed ebook about my process and where to source things and different manufacturers, which is on my website. We can come back to that at the end. So don't worry about furiously taking too many notes. But my setup's relatively rudimentary and basic in essence. A lot of the backdrops that I shoot my work in front of with the figurines are very kind of Blue Peter in style. You know, I'll pull out a Blue Peter card, as you can see on the screen, and stick cotton wool to it with some Pritt stick, and that acts as a pretty suitable backdrop for a lot of my work. The backdrops change, of course, from time to time. Sometimes they're just plain colours, but I quite like the cloudy sky backdrop. You'll see that features in a lot of my work when it comes to looking at it. My studio is littered with lots of little drawers full of figurines and miniature props, sweets and all kinds of things, model trees, trinkets, things that I use to interact with the figurines. I keep things relatively well organized in my studio because I'm always in and out of these drawers trying to find figurines from different sets, so I try and keep them relatively regimented. And I use a lot of colored cards and so on, which I keep in various drawers as well around the studio, so I can get at things pretty quickly and efficiently. In terms of camera gear, you'll see that on the next slide when it appears. Some people are more into this than others, but if you want to know what kind of gear I'm using for shooting my work, I use my regular Manfrotto tripods and ball head grip. I use that for pretty much all of the work I make, whether it be landscape, macro, or light painting work. And I'm currently using a 5D Mark III, a Canon, and it's the lens that's the most important thing. For this talk, I use my macro 100mm prime lens, which is wonderful. I've slowly but surely over time worked my way up to the L series lens, which is incredibly sharp and does a great job at capturing these tiny little figurines in nice sharp detail. So those are the three main bits of equipment that I am rocking at the moment. Soon to be upgraded, I think, to a Mark IV, or I don't know what the next Canon is going to be, but I might even wait for that. But the macro lens, I've used several iterations of the 100mm lens over the years as they continually improve the glass. And I think a good lens is more often than not better than a good camera body. So the lens is very important for me and worth kind of restating. When this image pops up on your screens, you'll know all about it because it's a picture of me looking rather grumpy in my home studio. I've recently just completed a project for Adobe using my little people, and they asked me to send them a whole bunch of images, including photographs of me working in my studio and sitting in my studio with my work surrounding me. Much to my dislike and dismay, I entertained the idea by sitting and, as you can see, trying to crack a smile. I much prefer being behind the camera. But you can see when this is the image on screen yet, Jane?
It is, mate. Sorry, yeah, I didn't. It's been on the screen for a while, so yeah, we're there.
Ah, good. Maybe it's speeding up a wee bit. That's good, yes. So if you're looking at the back right-hand side of that image, you'll see, like I said earlier, quite a basic setup. I've got a desk, which is really well lit with a couple of windows there. And there's my cloudy sky backdrop, some glue and lots of drawers and bits and bobs full of figurines and props. That's where I make a vast majority of my miniature work. It's not a kind of I don't have professional lighting at either side set up with a big backdrop or anything like that. I'm very comfortable working in this relatively straightforward style. It suits my needs. I've seen others that make similar work, working in more kind of complex setups, whatever floats your boat, I guess. I do sometimes take my work outdoors as well to shoot it, so natural lighting all the way for me, unless it's not doing the job I want it to, in which case you can tell I'm also a light painter. I'll actually use torchlight sometimes to light the scene. I find torch is incredibly useful. And of course, the miniature sets for these scenes are absolutely tiny. They're maybe, 30 centimeters wide and 30 centimeters deep or long. So really small area that I'm photographing with a macro lens. It doesn't need to be made any more complicated than that. And the next image, when it pops up, you'll see a kind of almost a bird's eye view of my desk and my setup, which is kind of strewn with figurines and blue tack and figures and so on. And this is the size of the surface really that I work on. I'll often draw the blinds on my windows just to help diffuse the light and make it a bit more even, which helps as well. And to be quite frank, from a technical standpoint, other than maybe going into some detail about aperture and ISO and so on, it's pretty straightforward. It's a very accessible form of photography, which I would implore anyone out there to give a try. In terms of aperture, let's get on with some of the technical stuff. I use a relatively wide aperture for most of my work to help maintain a shallow depth of field. Although the scenes are very comedic in their nature for the most part, it is all about kind of suspending disbelief, even just momentarily, for the viewer, so that the scene, almost as a hook, feels relatively kind of convincing to begin with. And then, of course, once you've seen the work for more than a split second, you can normally tell straight away it's a tiny figurine that's been placed in a kind of a Lilliputian scene. And again, when the next image pops up, you'll see another one of these Adobe shots that I was shooting a couple of weeks ago of me in action, recreating one of my miniature scenes using a face mask. I often use tweezers to help me more accurately kind of construct the scenes. It's a very fiddly process, albeit very enjoyable. It does test your patience at times, and I very sparingly use glue, sometimes blue tack, just to help hold the odd thing in place. Because especially a lot of the figurines that are standing up or running or striking a specific pose, you'll never get them to stand up on their own. So glue has become one of my best friends in terms of creating these setups. But as I say, I very sparingly use it because it's all about keeping things hidden and the scenes coming across as relatively convincing. And that's us back to the beginning shots that I showed you a moment ago. So I'm going to come out of here and we'll take a brief pause in between folders for any questions that come in. So Jay, when you see that happening, just let me know if you've got anything to be asked.
The one question I got for you for the minute was back when we were looking at that image where you showed us the first image of the two different size, the figurine that was sat on the toilet or whatever it was, where you were talking about the sizes of them. And you referred, was it something, the H scale? Is that what you referred to? Sorry.
HO scale.
HO scale. Has that got anything to do with like miniature railways or anything like that at all, David, was the question, do you know?
It does. It does, yeah. So these figurines are primarily created specifically for that purpose. They're for model railway scenes. I just kind of repurposed them and put them to work in different ways.
Perfect, brilliant. Yeah, I've got some generic questions for you, but that's the only main one, so we'll crack on if you're okay. I can see the for sale image, right. No problem at all.
Good, okay. So what we'll do now is the timing difference will perhaps be less relevant as we soldier on through these images because like I say, in terms of conveying technical knowledge to you guys who want to give this a go, there's not a great deal to share. It's more about helping to encourage your imaginations. I have a pretty active imagination, but there are different ways you can kind of tease that out yourselves if you don't or don't feel you do. I tend to work in two different styles or have two different approaches rather to how I make my work and come up with ideas. And before I forget to kind of get this across, we'll get to it now, I think, because I find this is quite useful advice. Camera gear, like I say, do your own thing, whatever works for you. Just make sure you're using a nice close-up macro lens. But in terms of forming ideas, which is definitely the most important part of this work, I tend to either look at a prop, so something that the figurines are going to interact with. That's where my idea will initially come from. I'll look at, as you can see in this image, I'll look at an empty can and think, yeah, I'm using if that resembled a small house for these little figures. Or I'll look at a cheese grater or any random household object really that us giants use, and the idea will be born out of the prop, and I'll then source figurines to suitably interact with it. Or the idea will come in the reverse of that kind of mechanism. It will come from the figurines themselves. So I'll buy what look to be relatively interesting figurines in terms of poses and so on, and the idea will be born out of the figurines themselves, and I'll then source props to kind of fit around them and have, and convincingly interact with them. There's that convincing nature of prop versus figurine, which is absolutely integral to this work being successful, certainly in the eyes of others, because as I mentioned earlier, it's kind of all about kind of suspending disbelief just momentarily, because the images feel relatively convincing, albeit comedic as well in nature. So we'll skip through a few of these slides. Here we go. This series of images that I'll kind of take you through now, let's kind of treat these as one-liner jokes. A lot of my work is fairly light in nature in its approach, and I've used that word a few times already. I'll try not to continually use it, but they are quite comedic, and it's difficult to kind of escape that in a sense, because when you're using miniature figurines to interact with daily objects that we all relate to as human beings, that's inherent, I guess, in the work. But as you'll see as we kind of move through the work this evening, the work can certainly take on a more serious kind of approach, and the ideas can become more serious ideas can of course become embedded within the work rather than just being overly playful and amusing. So all of this work's been made pretty much that we're going to be seeing just now not for my own amusement, but for my own catalogue, really. A lot of this work's been exhibited fairly extensively in various galleries. People buy prints of these things for their kitchens and living rooms, so it's certainly had a commercial value for me as I run my photography business. But this work's certainly a lot later than some of the more recent work that I've been making, certainly this year. So I've always found food and sweets, that kind of thing, a really handy subject matter to use within my work. I think it's because of the scalability of it. It's because of the scale of these edible objects. They interact incredibly well with the miniature figurines, and so it's a theme that I tend to return to time and time again. And because we've kind of got a bit of a timing issue in terms of what you're seeing versus what I'm saying, I'll perhaps spare you from the titles of some of the work. I really enjoy titling this work as well. I'll normally come up with a really cheesy or what I deem to be an entertaining title for some of these images. I feel like the titles are fairly integral to most of the work. And it's interesting because I sell this work. Someone recently bought a piece from a gallery that I'm exhibiting in and asked me if the title would be on the front of the print when they purchased it, to which I replied no, and they looked quite disappointed. And it's funny because I think that's the personal preference. Some people enjoy the titles so much they feel like the title should be on show, whereas most people I find tend to not want you to write on the front, the front of a photograph on the mount. I know my preference is to keep things nice and clean, and subject people as little as possible to my handwriting, but some people really enjoy having the title on show. Right, so Jay, you let me know when we're back round to the...
To be honest, I've got a feeling we've caught up because we're back on the can almost as you asked me, to be honest with you, David.
Good, okay. I think there's only a few seconds delay now then, that's pretty handy.
Hopefully. I could have told you what images we were on, sorry, but I didn't want to interrupt you.
No, that's okay, that's okay. So yeah, that's the second batch of images. We've got a lot more to get through. This next folder's got a lot more in it. Any other questions at this point, Jay?
Question, yes. Where am I? Sorry, I've got a couple. Are you ever, I think you've already mentioned it, but we'll ask it in case, do you ever use focus stacking in the work at all, David?
I don't ever use focus stacking. I tend to enjoy working with a relatively minimal depth of field, and just by using a wide aperture, I can accomplish that very straightforwardly. I don't tend to desire everything to be sharp in terms of front to back in my images, because the sets are so small, and I almost feel it's necessary to blur the backgrounds in a lot of the images, because otherwise you'd see how messy and how rudimentary the setup was. In essence, like the cloudy sky backdrop, no one really wants to see, the crusty bits of cotton wool in full focus. So I tend to find that blurring them out in a kind of subtle manner towards the back of the image works best visually. So I'm not sure that's something I've ever felt the need to do.
Brilliant. Are you painting the figures sometimes yourselves, David, or are they pretty much how they bought?
Yeah, sometimes I paint them. Sometimes I'll buy figures that aren't painted and I'll paint them myself. It's such a fiddly process. I much prefer to buy figures that are pre-painted. I think, my goodness, there's a lot. It'd be a lot to get through tonight if we went into massive detail. But there's a huge number of manufacturers of figurines out there. But one name I'm happy to drop into conversation tonight is Preiser, Preiser, Preiser figurines. They're very well detailed figures, and I buy a lot of Preiser figurines. They're well painted, well molded, and they just look scale-wise absolutely spot on most of the time. But yeah, I'll always err on the side of pre-painted figures if I can.
Brilliant. I am hanging on to some of the sort of more generic questions they've got for you, so that's it on what we've covered so far.
Okay, so this next folder is a bit bulkier. There's some more images in here compared to the other folders. We'll walk through these, and I think I titled this folder "Themed Work" because something that I've done over the years, sometimes intentionally, sometimes it's because it's a commission. I'll create numerous images all relating to the same theme, and we'll start with a slightly more playful theme to begin with. These images that we're about to look at now were created as a series for AIDA cruise ships, AIDA cruises. They own a massive fleet of huge cruise ships, which are probably all kind of floating around right now, waiting for passengers to return, to be honest. But they came to me a few years ago through an art broker and asked me if I could create some concept work for fitting out some restaurants on board the cruise ships with the miniature figurines interacting with food. And so they saw some of my work and were very keen to commission me, and the whole project went ahead at the end of last year, I'm thrilled to say. So these images here are the kind of finished products of the body of work that's now being fitted onto their latest cruise ship, I believe in Germany, which will be launched towards the end of this year. And they gave me a fairly loose brief. They were very generous in terms of, allowing me to be creative in my own space and time. And they just kind of said, make sure you use a fair amount of blue in the images, because these images are going to be floating around on the cruise ship. So I think they wanted that cool, kind of watery feel maintained throughout. And the rest of it was just down to me, really, buying different food types. They wanted some to be pasta related and so on, and burgers and so on. And off I went and created a series of dioramas. I think I created something like 22, 25 of these scenes, and they picked, I believe, 12 of them as the kind of final works that were all printed in Germany and shipped off to the cruise ship a couple of months ago. And that's what we're looking at right now. A couple of burger images for the burger restaurant and some pasta themed ones for the pasta restaurant and so on. And other than kind of, I guess it's easier for me once, after you've been doing this for a long time, you just kind of get a bit of a sense of what works well, but just finding food types that not only helped me create kind of entertaining scenes, but just the scale of certain food types, as I briefly mentioned earlier. I mean, things I have to think about that work well with the figures is always really important. If you use something that's too big, you want the lens to be, the subject matter, the figurines to be center stage and to be fairly present within the image. Of course, if you're too far back, then they kind of get a little bit lost quite quickly. most of the scenes, as I touched on earlier as well, they're normally lit using natural lighting just coming in from outside through the windows. I'll always use a tripod, so the length of the exposure doesn't bother me. And if I need to add additional lighting, I'll very rarely use a flash gun. Normally I'll use a torch just to help illuminate the scene slightly.
We're currently on the chef being wrapped by pasta, but I have a question. So you obviously, we know it was a commission, and you said it was for obviously the restaurants on the cruise liners.
Yeah.
Did they, you know, apart from the fact that, you know, you've obviously discussed that it's going to have a very strong food element, are all these concepts yours, David, or is there any input from them at all from a commission?
On this occasion, absolutely no input from them, which was nice. I've worked on similar jobs in the past where, you know, the design company that may have taken me on board as a freelancer to make some work for one of their clients, they can be a little bit more, yeah, they can lend more input. But AIDA Cruises and the art broker I was working with on that occasion, they just fully trusted my vision really and said, you know, create a bunch of these and we'll be picking 12. So that's why I made about twice as many, in the hope that there would be 12 good ones, if you like, out of the 25 or so that I made.
Well, I don't know how many you've shown us, but I didn't see a bad one, let's put it that way. So should have asked them for more money, mate. Brilliant.
That's very kind. Well, that was a well-paid job, I have to say. They treated me pretty well, and they gave me the space as well. They were a pleasure to work for.
Excellent. We're currently, I don't know, in case you need to know, we're on the image of the guy painting the gold stars.
Good. Okay. So on to a slightly different theme this time. Sometimes I'll just kind of go off on a bit of a tangent, and without the prompt of a client or anything like that, nothing financially driven about these images, but I'll just make a series of images for my own, for myself. The next couple of images were inspired by the ongoing mess that is Brexit. And several years ago, I just decided to try and create some scenes that kind of spoke about that, really. And the first image you're seeing here of the little man painting out one of the stars for obvious reasons. We can't all speak together tonight, sadly, this evening, but some of you will remember that massive Banksy piece that he made a few years back of a figure up a ladder. I think he's actually chipping away at one of the stars on a huge mural that he painted. But it looks very similar to this work, and I ended up looking up when Banksy made his work, and I think it was about 6 months after mine. Not that he'll know who I am, of course, but it was interesting to see the similarities between my piece and the Banksy piece. Something to have a look at afterwards, if you fancy. Flatter myself and maybe.
Are you secretly Banksy? Have you just come out as Banksy?
I couldn't possibly say.
Well, I want a piece of work then, please, mate, if you are. Okay.
Yeah, well,
come and paint my garage. Whatever you like, it's fine.
I'm not denying it. That'll keep things more interesting for tonight.
I think we've just closed the borders to Wales, mate, so we're not going to let you in. But when we do open the borders to Wales, you can come and paint my garage. I'm sure my partner will be thrilled. But yeah, excellent. So sorry.
I often have thoughts about Banksy turning up in Gartcosh, where I'm from in Scotland, and accidentally painting my garage. So as long as he comes here first,
okay, well,
I'm happy with that.
Well, just paint your garage and just come out as Banksy. He's not going to. Either he's going to dispute it, or you're going to earn a lot of money. I love it.
I'm not denying it, like I say. Let's pretend that I'm Banksy for this evening. That'll add a bit of extra spice to this time.
Love it.
Okay, so there's only a couple of Brexits or based images you'll be happy to hear tonight. We've heard quite enough about Brexit over the years. But this next series of images that I'll briefly take you through, again, it was about 1.5 years ago, maybe. Like many of us, I was watching Blue Planet 2 and just becoming increasingly appalled by the level of plastic pollution in the world and how that's another pandemic we're dealing with, of course. And I've got a young daughter who's just turned 6, and we often go on family walks. And she's always asking me why there's bottles on the ground and crisp packets and rubbish, especially at beauty spots. And, you know, it's difficult to give a sensible answer other than be kind of, you know, blatant and educated that some people don't know how to throw their rubbish away. But anyway, I've always been infuriated and sickened by littering in general. And of course, the plastic pollution problem, again, it just kind of, it made me want to create a series of images that kind of spoke about that. And so I created a series of images called Life in Plastic, where I went to a whole bunch of beauty spots, most of them next to the sea or next to lakes and lochs up here in Scotland, and collected rubbish, mainly plastic, that had been discarded, brought it home in a couple of bags, and had a quick think about how the figurines might interact with it, and then later returned to those beauty spots, one in particular out at Loch Lomond, and made this series of work with the figurines interacting with the plastic in situ, which is quite a sad series of work, really, but an important one for me to make, I felt. And incredibly, certainly didn't expect this to happen at the time, but after uploading some of these images online after I'd made the work, it seemed to gain a lot of traction and ended up being published all over the world in magazines and on various websites, which was quite lovely in a way. I think it was the ex-president of Cuba or somewhere completely random was photographed next to one of my images at some kind of plastic pollution conference. So it's been used quite broadly, which is lovely to see and hear about. So hopefully it went some way to helping raise awareness. Not that that always, resolves matters, but nice that it was used. And there was a company called the Happy Plastic Company, liked the work so much. I think they actually used all of the images I created for this series to help launch some non-plastic replacement materials for customers that they were working on, which was quite a nice additional win from this project. Lovely to be involved in the company that are trying to do their bit to kind of combat unnecessary plastic usage. And so as we move on throughout this series and then on to the next one, we'll come on to the pandemic series shortly. It's always been interesting to point out, as playful as the work is in some of the other works that I've shown you this evening, it doesn't take a great deal of effort to utilise the figurines in a more serious kind of manner, which is kind of how my journey began at art school all those years ago, depicting that rather tragic, distressing scene. And because the figurines are, of course, figurative, unavoidably figurative in nature, they're visually very, people react to the imagery very strongly for that reason, because it's very literal and visually easy to access. That's a good way of putting it. And it always garners a strong reaction from those who encounter it. So I think it's a sensible idea sometimes to use that easy kind of visual nature of the work to help raise or highlight certain topics. That's how I choose to express myself, of course, as well. So important for me to find a way around some serious subject matters within the work. I don't know if you're seeing the same image as I am of the man that's kind of been captured in the netting.
Yeah, we're on that one, mate. Yeah, we are.
Yeah. I find that image, I don't know, it's quite distressing in a way, which is the point of it, I suppose, but it's quite a grim image. It's horrible. Don't enjoy looking at that one, but I think that was kind of part of the point of making this work, to kind of help in capture how distressing a problem this really is. That image does something completely different to the one with the bottle tops, as you can see, which is kind of amusing in nature, conveying the same message, of course, collectively as a body of work, but visually very different. And what I think is almost the final image of this series are the little people in the plastic bottle there holding up the sign that was used as the introductory image for this series of work when it was launched online. That image was used in a lot of news articles about the work. Nice, easy kind of starting image for the series. And the number of plastic spoons that I found, or we found, was just crazy. Spoons and straws, terrible culprits in terms of plastic pollution. And there's the little figurine I showed you earlier when I was kind of comparing different scales of figure. I do promise you, if you want to give this kind of this style of work a go, there's something very enjoyable about kind of putting the figurines to work, if you like, and finding a way of busying them in a convincing scene. it becomes quite addictive. So you should be seeing a face mask image on screen now, if we're
not quite there yet, mate. We've still got the
okay.
chap on the coffee cup at the minute. Yeah, we're on the face mask. We're there now.
Okay. So this is kind of the beginning of the latest series, which I've titled Pandemic for obvious reasons, and again, kind of nice and unexpected for me recently that the BBC and the Telegraph and the Times, a few nice little press outlets run some features on this particular series of work recently, which has helped to gain some traction and views online, which is always a bonus. But of course, I felt massively inclined, especially since the beginning of lockdown back in March, to turn my attention to this grim subject matter as my main focus, and it's continued to be my main focus all the way through till now, and will continue to be for some time, I'm sure, because I'm not running out of ideas anytime soon. And I don't know, I felt very strongly compelled to use things like face masks and bottles of hand gel within a body of work, because of course these are things that we wouldn't have given a second thought some months ago. And in the Western world, things like face masks and hand gel have become almost iconic overnight. It's strange how things change and how quickly they change. And so I've just tried to kind of use my creative juices really to kind of create a body of work depicting various scenes, mainly using face masks as the foreground, in a playful yet serious way, again to kind of convey this grim topic in my own style. I was just shooting a new scene this week, which I think I do have here to show you shortly. It's not been published online yet, but we'll come to that shortly.
I think we might have slowed down a little bit, David. We're on the camper van. Oh, we've just gone off the camper van. We've got guys surfing on the mask at the minute.
Yeah, I think we're about 10 seconds behind. It's not too bad.
Okay.
Yeah, those ones where you're seeing the waves, they're called Pandemic Wave 1 and 2. So the titles are quite literal sometimes, always slightly comedic in nature, normally terrible puns in some way or another. The first image we looked at with the people swimming in the face masks, similar to this one, was called Summer Vacation 2020, because I'm not sure about you guys, but we were, much like many people in the UK and further afield, all of our holiday plans were completely scuppered this summer. So it felt relevant to make a couple of scenes up depicting that sad, sorry kind of scene. And the slideshow should move on to it shortly. You'll see a picture of the actual coronavirus model in a scene.
Yeah, we're there now. Yeah.
I think I'm probably the only person in the UK who actually ordered coronavirus by post. So there we go. This thing's a kind of 3D modelled viral structure that I managed to bizarrely find online, and it was small enough that I was able to use it in a few of my scenes, which was quite handy. I didn't use it too often. It's almost too literal when you use something like that in the work, but I used it for one or two images. And of course, hand gel, my word, how difficult was hand gel to get a hold of in the early weeks and months of the pandemic when it hit. It was like gold dust. And so a lot of the images kind of hark back to things like, the hand gel image is called Barrier to Barrier because it was virtually impossible to get a hold of. And the toilet tissue image, when it pops up in your screens, it's called Guarding the Stash.
I love it.
Because similar to hand gel, my word, how difficult was it to simply buy toilet tissue for a while? Ridiculous. The things that people do when they panic buy, yeah?
Oh, it was phenomenal at the beginning, just phenomenal.
I know. It made very little sense. But of course, there's a few images using soap as well, for obvious reasons. But by all means, in the comments section, if any of you can think of any other kind of iconic subject matters to come out of this crazy kind of COVID period that we're living through, fire your ideas over to Jay, and I'll maybe incorporate one or two of them in my next images that I make. I'm not running low on ideas, but it'd be nice to kind of freshen things up with different subject matters, props.
The first thing that came to mind, and I know you and I have had this conversation when we started to get to know each other, was one of the most definitive things for me was at the beginning of the pandemic. I was having to do food deliveries to some relatives that were about 40 minutes away. You literally couldn't get anything, and it was a stretch of road which is a busy dual carriageway every day. And I've never in my years of driving ever been on a dual carriageway for 30 minutes, didn't see another car in either direction. Just first thing that was in my head was Mad Max, Walking Dead. It was, and then all of a sudden, and I don't know about you in Scotland, and it was obviously, we were, Scotland, like us in Wales, were a little bit behind, England and so on. But it was almost like, even though the restrictions were only slightly removed, all of a sudden it was just like this traffic came from nowhere. It was just like, and it was quite, for 6 months looking after them and helping them out on these desolate roads that got busier, slightly busier over time, obviously. But then all of a sudden it was just like the green light was hit again, and it was just like bloody hell. And it was almost like having, that for me was one of the biggest things that stuck in my head. Apart from the endless queues, mate. I don't know if have I seen queues in any of your work yet?
Yeah, I haven't seen any queues. I've actually not got a bunch of cars to use, although I've just last week received a whole bunch of shopping trolleys, which I'm going to try and incorporate into the work. Okay. I'm just getting to a few repeats here. You'll see them flash up on your screen in a moment. But yeah, I've got some little shopping trolleys that I'm going to use in an idea that I want to shoot this or next week, of people queuing outside some kind of shop. I'll see what I come up with for that.
Something quite topical. I'm just sort of scanning the question panel because you asked. People. Good point. People not taking social distancing seriously. How you would reflect that? I'll ask you this one in a minute because this is more about an image. People are, grim, but we're not afraid of grim. People partying while people are dying. Strong, message, the right message, isn't it? Yeah, I like it.
Yeah, that is good.
I don't like it, but it's right, and it's
what's happening, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I don't know if it's in here tonight, but I do have an image. You'll find it online on Instagram, or whatever, of a bunch of people partying around a Corona beer bottle. It's called Corona Party because there was this thing at the beginning of the pandemic getting really serious, which I just couldn't believe it was true, that people were actually hosting Corona parties to spread the virus because they wanted to get it out the way early. It's crazy.
You know what? It sounds ridiculous, but then when you say it and you think about it, it's just, it's a horrible thing to believe, but I believe it. Yeah, I believe it. And I think there's that element of, I don't know how you would depict it. Well, you're obviously the master of it, David, but it's that, I'm not looking for the word ignorance, but I have been quite shocked by the attitude of, it won't get me. You know what I mean? It's not going to affect me. That.
In terms of social distancing that you touched on a moment ago, it's a very good idea. I will consider creating an image that kind of goes against that whole theme, because that's what a lot of people are doing, of course. But the image that will flash up on your screen in a moment of the chessboard.
Yeah, we're there already.
Yeah. I just shot this. Was it the weekend? I think. What a faff this was to shoot, but I'm glad I did it. It's this whole social distancing thing is so important, and of course I think the little people only have to space out by 2 centimeters, unlike us giants. But this particular image or series of images is called Your Move Rona, because if we all do our bit and socially distance and so on, then it's kind of over to the virus. What have you got next? Because if we're all careful, then that should be enough. We shall see. Right, I think that's the end of that folder for now. Are there any more questions, Jay, before we move on?
Yeah, Well, a question specifically for that folder. Sorry, I've got it in amongst all the ideas, but obviously I can copy and paste all these ideas for you tomorrow anyway, David. But there's one about the shark. Let me find it. How did you get the parachute to look so free floating?
Okay, so anyone that was on the light painting webinar that we did, was it last month or a month or so ago? Hang on, I'm just trying to sort my slideshow up as I speak to you. I'm trying to get a little bit ahead of you. I'm going to come out of there. That's not working. Yeah, so the parachute image was created in a way that in fact, it's probably the only example I can think of where I've used a slight cheat to make that image. I used a small bit of fishing line to suspend the parachute from a paintbrush, and it just kind of free floated in the air, and I photographed it in situ, and then using very basic editing skills, edited out the top of the fishing line using Lightroom. I don't use Photoshop, as some of you might remember if you've listened to me before. I'm kind of not against Photoshop. I just, as a light painter, I certainly don't use it because I don't feel the need to. But even in the macro work, I don't sort of over edit anything. I just use a very minimal editing approach. And so yeah, I just edit at the top of the fishing line. Simple as that. Right, are you still there, Jay?
We're still there. Have you added these ones in now for my benefit, now that you know a bit more about me? Because we're on we've had a little taste of your Star Wars, and we're on Spider-Man at the minute.
Perhaps. I'm just going to reverse 3 images, I think. My slideshow is going a little bit haywire there. You should have a photograph of Barbie on the screen.
No, we've got Stormtrooper with an iron brew.
Yeah.
Daredevil
Barbie, I think.
Daredevil with a coronavirus bottle. Barbie, we're on Barbie, mate. What a Barbie.
So yes, when you ask these images for your benefit, Jay, the Barbie image certainly is. I know how much you love your Barbie dolls. I'm joking. Well, I don't know. Do you like the Barbie dolls? I play with Barbie.
You know what? I bought my stepdaughter. I call her my stepdaughter. We're not actually married, but she considers me her stepfather. Fortunately, she's as geeky as I am, and I have bought her the Star Wars Barbies, or if they are actually officially Barbies. So okay. She's had those, but no, I don't own any. I'm going to keep quiet in case I do. I don't think I do. But
yeah, even if you said yes, you'd be in good company, because as you know, I've got a young daughter, and I'm forced into play. Well, I don't even know if I'm forced, but I play Barbies pretty much on a daily basis. So don't worry about that. So anyway, much to my daughter's horror, I did shoot 1 or 2 scenes in her Barbie dream house. This one here depicts Barbie in self-isolation in a rather depraved state. I felt it had to be done. That was right at the beginning of lockdown. And the next image, which I think you saw flash up a moment ago, is of course of Deadpool trying to, again, add a kind of comedic slant to the situation where people were almost steering clear of Corona beer because of the coronavirus, of course, which is just ridiculous. And the shares plummeted in Anheuser-Busch, I think, for the Corona sector of their business, which is rather funny and crazy at the same time. So a few of these toy images kind of hark back to the kind of pandemic series. Some of them aren't at all. I've been making this work for something like probably about 8 years now. Completely different to the Little People work in the sense that the props are a lot bigger. The figures are about 6 inches tall, most of them. And so I mainly buy, as strange as it sounds, doll's house furniture and props to interact with the figures. And it's again a bit like the Little People. If you actually really go searching hard enough and for long enough, it's rather bizarre what you can find out there and what miniatures people actually create. Going back to the Little People just momentarily, you can buy all kinds of Little People in very strange and compromising situations and sexual scenes if you go looking for them. And I'm not sure who's buying them for the model railway sets, but they do exist. And so, again, much to my daughter's horror, I use a lot of her doll's house props, some of which I actually bought before she even arrived. She owns them all now, of course. I don't get much of a look in. And of course, I've created a pretty extensive Star Wars series. I'm a big Star Wars fan, so I've created a huge hundreds of images that are kind of Star Wars themed. And more recently, over the last few years, some Marvel work as well, and a bit of DC. I've yet to be sued. Quite interesting, actually. I had a very interesting chat with an art broker, a pretty big art broker down in London, coming back to Banksy again. There we go. Just sort of tenuous link. They actually represent him, and they did a little bit of work with me a couple of years ago, and they've got a pretty switched on legal department that I had a very interesting discussion with over my toy themed work, because I've always been kind of mindful of the fact that I am using, of course, you know, Disney property, if you like, for some of this work when it comes to Star Wars and so on. I'm curious to think, you know, if somebody in that area did come into contact with my work, what would happen? And their opinion was, don't worry too much, you'd probably just get a cease and desist, telling me to basically behave myself and stop making it. But then again, because it's artwork and appears in art galleries, does that give me a license to use it extensively? I'm not sure what the real answer is to that question, but food for thought.
On that
Yep.
note, we work with another a macro photographer, not actually insects and plants, Michelle Whitmore, who does a lot of contributions for us on the Academy and in the magazine and so on. And her grandson has become quite a great little Lego photographer. And yeah, it is a grandson. And Josh is, I think he could even be 14 now, but when I met him, it was about 3 or 4 years ago. And he knew I was a Star Wars fan, and I was doing some film with Michelle. And while he was busy in one studio, he'd shot me some great sort of Star Wars Lego images, which he presented to me in some frames, which was fantastic. But he then, the two of them then went on. Well, I'm going to get the name wrong. I think it's this site. Is it Redbubble, where you can sell your own wares and things? Yep. And so Josh had done some Marvel Lego characters, and they were selling the likes of mugs and whatever was available from Redbubble. And I remember him, I bought one without telling him, and then I sent him a picture of me drinking from it, and he was absolutely over the moon. But they had a cease and desist off. I don't know if that was before Disney had them, but they did. So they were taken down then. So I don't know, obviously, how that reflects now, but just fitted in.
Yeah, I think these things are interesting. They make interesting discussion sort of focal points. I mean, I'm assuming on a case-by-case basis there'll be a different example or maybe answer for a lot of these stories and situations that arise. But I would hazard a guess that if you're going to turn your imagery into actual products, like you were touching on, like mugs and key rings and that kind of thing, then that becomes an infringement on the property of the ownership. I think if you're just making artworks out of the objects, I think that's maybe slightly different. I'm not sure if I'm right there. I'm not a lawyer.
I think there's got, I don't know, I agree with you. I think there's got to be some element of artistic license, isn't there? I would have thought. Because one of the questions that's been asked, actually, David, and it was quite apt that we're talking about it now, when we were looking at this section in particular, and you've got, obviously, you had Corona logo in there. You know, we've had the Iron Brew logos and things like that, you know, where, you know, is that also something that could fall into that realm of copyright and issues for you? It's oh, Michelle Whitmore's online with us. There she is. Hi, Michelle. So she's watching with us. So it was, I can't remember how old she's got us. How old would Josh have been at the time? Because he's grown up a bit now. I haven't seen you guys in ages because of this bloody virus. She might answer in a second there. Well, he was 9 at the time. There we go. So entrepreneur at 9 or 10.
Jeez,
brilliant.
Wow.
But no, it's interesting, isn't it? What falls into the realms of artistic license and so on, and
it's an interesting one. And because you just mentioned it there, like the Iron Brew bottles and cans and so on that appear in some of the work. I made the bold decision, and because I'm a pretty upfront and stand-up kind of guy, I did approach Bars, the makers of Iron Brew. When I first came back to Scotland, because I lived in Guernsey for a while, when I came back about 5 years ago, I sent them an email and said, do you have a legal team or copyright team that I could liaise with? Because I'm considering using miniature iron brew representations in some of my work. And after months and months and months of not hearing anything, and then me briefly chasing it, they came back and actually put me in touch with them, and they said, we'd rather you didn't. And that was the end of that. So to my word, I did say to them, I won't make any further work using the iron brew produce, if you like, in my work. And I haven't, so I only ever show the work that was made prior to that period. It just goes to show, if you ask the question, sometimes, you know, you'll just get a bit of fat no, so maybe ask sometimes.
Yeah, no, for definite. It was.
I would hate to give advice on it and then give the wrong advice. So I would suggest be quite wary about it, and give some consideration towards how you're using the work and how you potentially intend on selling it. Is it going to remain just as artworks, or are you going to turn it into products? Be careful.
Definitely.
Okay, so on that note, back to my Star Wars figures. Yeah, some of these figures, like the ones you're seeing probably right now with the arcade and the Stormtrooper reclining, these are actually a bit smaller. They're only a few inches tall. Some of the figurines do vary in sizes, and I've therefore got to kind of adapt and adopt different props for that purpose. Fairly easily done. Depending on the delay, you'll see a Stormtrooper with high heels on standing up in a moment.
No, we're there. I think there's no delay. Don't quote me, but we're
okay. Good. A really straightforward image. This and one that always makes me laugh. Maybe you don't even need the high heels, but I mean, Stormtroopers are so generic, aren't they? They're kind of unisex. You can't even tell, you know, what's going on inside those costumes. This obviously makes it blatantly, well, I was going to say obvious, but does it? Who knows? It could be a transvestite Stormtrooper. But, you know, in all these times of interest in gender fluidity and gender discussions that are ongoing on a continuous basis, this image became a little bit more interesting all of a sudden in a gallery that showed it a few years ago in Edinburgh. And some famous drag queen opened the gallery that night for the beginning of the show, which was interesting, with a very entertaining discussion about my series of images that were depicting Stormtroopers wearing feather boas and so on. And here's one of a Buckfast bottle being held up by a Stormtrooper. I don't know if you guys know what Buckfast is. It's grim stuff. It's a tonic wine. It's full of caffeine and alcohol, and it's kind of renowned up here in Scotland in some towns as being a pretty dangerous drink. It's it leads to
We've got a delay again. We haven't quite caught up with you now, so it's a bit weird. There must be something going on with the internet.
I don't know what's going on. But yeah, you'll be there in a moment.
Oh, they were there. Buckfast, we're there now.
Okay, good.
Yes, I've experienced Buckfast a long time ago, because it's been a long time sober. But yes, I have experienced it. It is dangerous.
I think once you experience it, you don't really forget it. It's pretty grim. And then the last couple of images in this folder, I believe, or in fact the last images of the evening, we're approaching them now, are back to Barbie again.
We got Barbie in a face mask at the minute. Yes.
Yeah, really recently found someone on Etsy, I think it was, that sells tiny little miniature face masks, much to my delight. And so I've ordered a few more of these. I'm going to try and create some more scenes using face masks and kind of popular toys, and see where that takes me. But interestingly, I wasn't sure if the coronavirus themed work would be that marketable in terms of sales or selling the work. And much to my surprise, in a pleasant way, it has been. Like the galleries that stock my work and a couple of shops that stock my work have been selling the COVID-related work pretty successfully, which is nice. Much to my surprise, really. Not sure how many people want to be reminded about it, but I think I don't know. I think because they're playful in one way, it's important to make light of things when you can, because, you know, if you didn't do that, we'd be kind of consumed by the concern and the kind of grimness of this scenario as a whole. I've just recently, soon to be available on my website, depending on how many copies I actually have printed, I've just finished my Corona calendar for 2021, which is jam-packed full of all kinds of creative imagery using face masks and so on. speaking of not wanting to be reminded of 2020, it'll be interesting to see who buys that.
I don't know. You might.
A new coronavirus-related image.
I buy my partner a calendar every year, so I'm actually thinking that you might need to put me down for one, mate. To be honest, she won't be expecting that. Yeah, definitely. It's usually something humorous, you know, what I can find in the typical calendar shop. She's got a bit of a warped sense of humor, but yeah, you know,
if it's a sense of humor, I think that calendar may be a good fit.
Absolutely. You know what, we've talked about it being humorous, but what has come across to me tonight, David, and I know this is a conversation actually that you'll probably remember, that when we first started to get to know each other, just those initial chats before you did anything for us, I had just seen, you know, found your Facebook through Laura, putting us in touch with each other, and then seeing, you know, the first of your pandemic images. And you started the conversation on what my feelings were on, you know, documenting it in your artistic way, and I think it is so important. We've had this conversation behind the scenes that I think people and looking through it tonight, and it's not just me just saying it. There's loads of it in the chat panel. Yeah, it's humorous, but it's powerful. I hadn't seen the plastic stuff before. You know, the life in plastic, and it is spot on. And it sometimes you know, don't get me wrong, you know, the grim images are powerful and striking, and they will always strike a chord, but you know, people will avoid those, but people won't avoid these, and the message will get heard. So I think when you have a given talent, which you clearly do, mate, and obviously and a great imagination as well, which absolutely helps. But it's another way. You're creating art, and I understand why people would buy it, you know, because of the way it is portrayed. But it is giving the message, and that's why you said it's been featured in magazines and newspapers. Because you know, don't get me wrong, I'm not taking the edge off how sad you know, things are happening and people are dying. I'm not trying to take the edge off that at all, and I don't think you are. Yes, there's an element of humor, but you are getting the message across, and it's really struck me as powerful tonight, mate. I know we're talking about toys and we've featured it a bit more maybe than just that, but you've done it.
Thanks for the kind words, and it's really important for me to hear things like that, especially from the others that are on this call tonight, kind of providing feedback. You know, because as you remember, Jay, as you touched on there, you know, early on when I was beginning to create this new pandemic series, I was genuinely concerned, and I mean that. I was genuinely worried about sharing a single image from that series online, because I was so concerned that people would assume or presume, wrongly, may I add, you know, I was somehow trivializing the matter, but absolutely not. You know, just trying to approach and process the situation from my kind of creative viewpoint, a bit different to most others. But that's how I express myself, and after several discussions, you included, and with a couple of close friends of mine, one being an artist as well, you know, we came to the conclusion that art becomes, if anything, more important at times like this. And for that reason, it just gave me all the impetus I needed really to crack on making the work and sharing it, and it's been shared pretty widely now, and gains strong but the right kind of reactions, much to my pleasure, because like I say, my concern around that was quite real early on.
I think the balance is there, and this is genuinely live. We've just had a comment from Mandy in the panel, and I'm a nurse, and I'm not offended at all. And we need that light relief as well as getting the message.
Oh, good.
So, and then that's been reiterated. So, and I think you have, and not just me saying it, mate. You've got that balance. You know.
I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah.
I'm really relieved and happy to hear that. Thank you, Mandy, and thank you, everyone, because that genuinely means a lot to me.
Good. No, well, it's being reiterated full on, and the chat panel's just lit up. Before I get into the questions, are we on the last image? Sorry, it's me interrupting and talking to you. I know it's been a bit different. Normally, let you do it.
We'll just come out the folder, but that's the entertaining part, or visually entertaining part, over for this evening, I'm afraid. But yeah, I've got hundreds more of these to share. Go and find them on my website and various other links on Instagram and so on. But when you find my social media links, you'll realise there's a lot of this work out there.
Well, we've already discussed you and I beginning, because obviously I want, we're definitely going to do a lot more with you going forward, but, we can start looking at these things closer if you're up for it over the next few months anyway. And
Sure.
judging by the feedback we're getting tonight, they're going to want to see more. I want to see more. I'm seeing more every time we get you online, so it's amazing. Right, let's get through some of these questions
Sure.
with you, mate. Right. Okay. So let's go. I'm going to go back to the top of the list, and I'll work my way down it. So I'm not. They might be a bit out of sequence, mate, but we'll get there. Okay. So one of the comments early on was the colours are very vibrant and do have a bit of a Hockney feel about that in terms of contrast. Is that something you deliberately set out to achieve?
It's not. It's a really interesting observation. Someone that knows their art there. No, it's not something that I had any intent on prior to shooting any of the work. Interestingly, though, when I studied art school, some, like I say, 20 or so blooming years ago, my goodness, when we went from learning old school photographic techniques in the darkroom and just shooting in black and white, mainly for the first year, when we finally started being allowed to develop our own colour negatives and print on coloured paper in the larger darkroom that was at Glasgow Art School, I was very drawn to this notion of, I wouldn't say abusing colour, but cranking it up. I do like my colour, and I often feel that if you're going to use colour, really use colour. If you're going to use black and white, then use it really well. And as soon as I learned more about colour photography, I fell in love with it. I very rarely work in black and white. And yeah, that's maybe more of a subconscious thing. But I think from the early days, I always enjoyed just increasing the saturation subtly, but enough just to make it a bit more punchy than maybe normal.
Well, Steve, who asked the same question, you've inspired because of the Hockney reference. He said that he's actually thinking now that he would go and actually recreate some of the Hockney scenes himself. So brilliant. Well, look, Steve, if you do, we want to see them. So don't forget the Photography Academy photo critiques, or chuck them on the Photographer Academy, Facebook group, and let me and David know. So we'd love to see those. So yeah, I'll hold you to it.
Interesting.
You've created your own project there, Steve. So we're looking forward to seeing it. Brilliant. Right, where am I? There was a question, and I'm not sure if they joined late in it, or whether it was when the image on the screen at the time, which I think was the guy painting out the star. And correct me if I'm wrong. Was that shot outside on like a garden table? Because the question was about.
Yeah, I don't work outside very often compared to my little home studio at the top of my house. But that was just shot on my patio, my garden patio outside on a very bright day.
The question came in specifically, and I remember that image being on the screen at the time, and I think that's why it came in, was what do you use for the floors texture? And obviously, to me, I thought it was your garden table, because most of the stuff is just, the studio stuff is mainly, well, I know mainly the coloured card or something to suit what you're trying to create, right? Yeah.
That's right. And interestingly, I got a question the other night on a similar kind of call when I was speaking to the Camera Club, and, if it's a horrible question to caught off guard with, but they were like, what are your plans for the next 5 years? Where do you see yourself in 5 years' time? I felt like it was a job interview, and it's a really good question. And I don't know about 5 years' time, but I certainly know that over the short to medium term, with the little people work and the macro work that I've been doing, I want to do a lot more work in situ, so outdoors and around maybe Glasgow or around different locations, and make work that's kind of location centric, that kind of speaks to the people from that area. So I'm just toying with the idea of how to approach that and what I'll be doing more specifically with that. But I think early next year I'll begin a new project around the streets of Glasgow, if allowed out.
There was a couple of, but let's stick on that note. I didn't lose you there. You're still with me, mate, yeah?
I'm still here, yeah.
Brilliant. Staying on that note with regards to working on location, obviously a couple of people asked if you could just talk about the, you talked about glue and blue tack. Was it as simple as using something like print stick, or do you use something differently to hold the figures in place?
Yeah, so very small little dabs of blue tack, very, very small. I'll use them maybe on the bum of a figurine that's maybe meant to be sitting, or at the base of a small plastic tree, you know, one of the kind of model railway trees.
Yeah.
To help figures stand up, you need to take a more subtle approach, and I'll normally use, if the figures just will not stand up themselves, which they very rarely do, I'll use a very small splodge of super glue and hold the figurine in place for a few seconds until it sticks. That helps, especially if I'm working under pressure for a commission or for a client piece. I won't muck around. I'll just use a bit of glue. If I'm being more patient and just making work for myself, I'll maybe take a slightly less aggressive approach. But yeah, glue comes in really handy.
And is it? I presume that, and the question was, is it a little bit more? Is it harder outside in the environments, or you know, the weather and so on, or is it a case of what, you know, don't work outside until the weather is in your favour?
Yeah, if you make it, yeah, exactly, common sense. If you're making this work outside, then just do so when conditions meet the requirements. Really, so it's similar to when I was talking about light painting. Really, you know, check the forecast, make sure everything's lined up, and off you go. But I mean, working indoors, the beauty of doing that is, of course, you know, it doesn't matter what the weather's doing outside. You can add a bit of extra lighting yourself, and yeah, it's maybe easier, certainly easier in that respect.
Brilliant. We're getting there. Well, I've got to ask this. Because your name is so close to Gulliver, did that inspire you to do the little people?
No, that wasn't the reason, but yeah, I'm glad there's always someone that pointed this out. No, it's a strange coincidence, and whenever my work hits the press, normally publications like the Sun or the Mail or one of these rags, you know, they'll kick things off with Gilliver's Travels, of course, straight away.
Do you know what? I hadn't even thought about it, and before Steve put it in the panel earlier, you referred to, you used the word, I can't pronounce it correctly, but Lilliputian, as in Lilliput, wasn't it? And that was the first time I actually thought about it. And then, of course, when it came in the comment that do you see any relation, I had to ask it. Sorry, mate. Well, actually, they all know now anyway that you're Banksy, so Gulliver's out the window. You know, exactly. We've outed Banksy tonight.
It's just the front.
I love it. I know you did touch on it, but it has been asked in case it was missed. You said that you prefer a shadow depth of field. So, what kind of focal length do you normally work around?
Well, because it's a 100mm lens, depending on the scene, it's anything from maybe 2.8 to 5.6, something like that. That kind of range is normally roughly what I work within. So relatively wide, pretty shallow depth of field. And like I say, normally for the reasons that I intentionally want the background to fade out, to blur out, so that the viewer's focus is kept, you know, solidly on the action that's being depicted by the figurines.
I think I've got a few things I want to share with you. One other question, sorry. Have you ever combined the two, so the macro and the light painting?
Not with any success. I think I've dabbled with it once, really briefly, with the figurines stuck at the set. I think they were at the end of a table, and I waved some lights around behind them. Complete experiment. No, I haven't. But again, that is something that's on a very long list of mine. That is literally written down, and something I will get to, because it could be interesting. I'm going to have to use some pretty small light sources though.
No, fair point, absolutely. Obviously, and I'm not joking when I say that the feedback is that you've inspired people tonight. Paul has asked, he loved your take on plastic issues and has some ideas of his own. And do you have any issue of him exploring that? And I'm sure the answer is no. You go ahead and
absolutely. No. I get contacted a lot by people that either, you know, will go off and create even ideas that look fairly similar. No, I'm very happy that my work I'm flattered if it's inspired you to go and try something different. So go knock yourself out.
Brilliant. Last couple of questions, and then we'll give them a few reminders. This is a reference to both, obviously, what we've shown them so far, your light painting and obviously your miniature work. Has one been more successful, I guess, commercially than the other? I presume the miniature work, is it?
It's a very good question. I was chatting to someone about this evening, strangely. So not this evening, this afternoon, the light painting work from a commercial standpoint, if we rewind maybe 7 or 8 years ago, so when I've been light painting only for a few years, light painting seemed to be so incredibly popular with marketers and design agencies online for ad campaigns. I got a lot of work, unexpected work, even when I had a full-time job at the time, and didn't really need to be making any money at my photography back then. But since then, I've been doing this full-time for the last few years. But back then, I was getting a lot of light painting inquiries and very, very well-paid jobs for fairly straightforward light painting work. Back then, the light painting was by far the most kind of commercially profitable approach that I had in my artillery. Since then, the little people work has become more of a staple diet, shall we say, for commissions and for advertising agencies and for that kind of branding work. I'm just hopefully about to start working with a new coffee brand, a new coffee retailer, with my figurines, which is quite exciting. So yeah, that continues to kind of march on, whereas the light painting work maybe falls a bit more into the kind of fine art category in terms of maybe exhibiting the work and selling it that way.
Yeah.
And also teaching physical workshops, which are hugely enjoyable. Once they're back up and running again, I'll be very happy because I love teaching the light painting workshops. They're a huge amount of fun, but they're obviously currently on hold.
Of course. Brilliant. So a couple of people have asked us for some reminders. You mentioned your calendar. You said that's going to be available to buy from your website?
Yeah, I think I'll make it available through my website. I will do my best. My printer's just finalising the final draft of it this week, so I'm hoping in the next 2 weeks tops, it'll be a finished product, and I'll have a copy to post out. So yeah, keep an eye out if you want to grab one of those.
And well, if you remind me when it's available, I'll chuck it all over the Photography Academy social media for you as well, and we can get that across to them. So somebody's asked about the light painting webinars. Did I say they were available to watch? Yes, they are. The light painting webinars are on the Photography Academy, so the two that we did an introduction and then we did a more in-depth step. Well, I say I didn't do it, David did it.
Yeah.
So they're available for you to watch on the Photography Academy. So if you log in and you just search under David Gilliver, or if you search under light painting, they're fairly close to the top of the new release list because we've only done them within the last few months, so it shouldn't be hard to find those at all. And I think that's all of the questions. David, we need to remind them. Obviously, look, it's on their screens. So you have already created your selling ebook on the step-by-step guide to both. And was I right at the beginning that if they do buy the two, it's a discount anyway, isn't it?
Yeah, I think the website offers 25% off if anyone wants to grab both of them. But these were written during lockdown when I was twiddling my thumbs and homeschooling my daughter. And as I just touched on, when my workshops ground to halt for light painting, I just took all my learnings online and wrote this massively detailed interactive ebook so people could learn, in the meantime that way. And that just kind of snowballed into writing a second one because I still had a couple of months at the time to spend, and just threw myself into a second one, which was actually the easiest way to do it rather than having a break. So yeah, they're both very detailed and contain lots of technical aids and links to websites and useful information.
Brilliant. So you can find all of that, obviously, as David said, through his own website, through his social media, and of course we've got links going off to him on our social media, and obviously on the reminders that you get from us on that as well. We touched on it, and I know the environment we can't, but let's talk about it. Obviously, you do run successful and very popular workshops when we can, and we know we're not there at the moment, unfortunately, but sign up to David's newsletter, get involved with him on social media. And obviously, when we can bring these, when David can bring these things back, we'll obviously help get the message out there. But as I've already said, when I'm not allowed out of Wales at the minute, mate. But us Celts, when they let us Celts mix again, I'm definitely coming to visit. Or as you're coming down to paint my garage now, anyway, mate. So
exactly. We'll just do it then.
Sorted. David, mate, it's been, honestly, I know we've run over, but everybody's loved it. I've enjoyed all the time we spent together. I know we're going to do more. We've done more, but the feedback is phenomenal, and thank you. And they want more, so I'll abuse you and get you back on here as much as I can, mate, and we get the message across. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it. You can go.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me back again.
Yeah, just lay off the Buckfast because I do have memories.
No problem.